All right, this is Liz Baxter, and I want to welcome everyone back after the break. And, I just have to say that it was pretty amazing to me to have somebody be able to keep their train of thought while the audio isn't working in the way that John Powell did. And perhaps later today, you can look and see like the entire central part of Northern of California like is without power. So just amazing kudos to him for walking through that keynote. Want to welcome you to this panel, which is titled Community Partnerships to Promote Equity and Address Racism. And I'm incredibly honored to have this group of panelists with us. I hope all the panelists have got their videos turned on and we'll all mute ourselves when we're not talking. We have a tiny bit of Zoom housekeeping just to remind us of. So the audience is all muted and your video cameras are turned off. So you should only see the panelists and the slides if there are slides to be shown. And I almost don't want to say this out loud, but if you have technology issues, if you can put it in the chat. But if you've got questions, you should put them in the Q&A box. Our TA folks are monitoring the chat, and so we'll be able to help if there's anything going on. We are recording all of the sessions, and any slides that are being used will be available on the website after we get done on Wednesday, and that's www.washingtonach.org. So John shared a lot of thoughts about kind of moving us from understanding to action. And this panel is really going to focus on community partnerships that have been built and some of those things that address and promote equity and address racism. And so we're really looking forward to that. Two of our panelists, Pastor Anthony Steele and Yusuf Bashir, will talk about their organizations, some of the challenges and some of the creative things that they've taken on, and also how they've worked with ACHs. And then we also have a representative from Better Health Together, Hadley Morrow, who's going to talk about some of the work that Better Health Together is doing in their region around those same issues. Their bios are going to be posted in the chat so that we don't have to take up precious minutes in reading through those. And then I have this job that I'm still not exactly sure how I'm going to do it, to try and make sure that we use the time and are able to keep the panelists to in probably within about 7 or 8 minutes each. And then we'll have kind of a huge chunk of time for some Q&A and some dialogue, both with the audience and amongst them. So Pastor Steele, I'm going to turn it to you. You're our first panelist. And again, you've got about 7-ish minutes. And I'm not sure how I'll let you know when you're close to that 7-minute mark. But if you could just kind of start us off by introducing yourself and the work that's happening in your community. And thank you for joining us today.
Well, wonderful. I'm certainly glad to be here. My name is Pastor Anthony Steele. I'm the pastor of Allen AME Church in Tacoma, Washington, and we've been serving the community of Tacoma for now 131 years. That's right, 131 years. And so we have had a wonderful time in service, but for the most part, for 131 years, Allen AME Church has been serving the community pretty much on its own, out of its own coffers. And now we're in a season now where we're enjoying a great partnership with our ACH, Elevate Health. But what we have right here is the Allen Russell Conference Center. This is one of our buildings. It's one of our flagship buildings that is for community use. We have about 65,000 square feet of billable space in total throughout all of our buildings. However, this particular building has office space. Next slide. if we can go to the next slide, yeah. And this is just some of the office space that we have that is available, that we also lease out to various companies and groups and nonprofits as well. Next slide. And we also have a classroom space. We've various institutions and colleges and universities also come and use this space. Also, other symposiums are held in this particular space. Next slide. We also have a commercial kitchen. We have one of the largest commercial kitchens in Pierce County, and this is just a portion of our particular commercial kitchen, and it's used. We're entering into a time now where it's going to be used as a commissary, so that specialty food trucks as well as caterers can lease out the space, so that the community can actually use it to move their businesses forward, also to employ a number of community partners. And so Elevate Health and our ACH has really come on board to begin to do some work with us. Next slide. So this of course is just an example of what is going on. I pretty much speak from a perspective of the Black community. I have no qualms about speaking from that particular portion of the community. We have a number of products, but we have challenges in delivering and presenting those products, not only to our community, but to the city and the county and state at large. Next slide. So with all of the good news, there comes some other challenges as well. And what I normally look at, the barriers of the Black community really are a thing I call systemic ism. And most would really run to racism as a part of the barrier for the Black community. But what we have found in trying to apply for certain contracts and grants and partnerships is that we have barriers of a systemic ism. Next slide. This systemic ism, there's three parts: cronyism, nepotism, and racism. And these are three of the large ones, if you would, that continuously have been a barrier. Now, this is not just, again, this is not just some seasonal situation. Again, Allen AME Church has been in this particular area for 131 years. So we have some history, and so we understand that these are major barriers over and over and over again for us to actually to deliver great products, but for whatever reason we have these particular barriers in our particular community that stop us from actually helping others to actually to grow various neighborhoods and various households. Next slide. With cronyism, we have found that many times we will apply for grants and contracts, but it's almost as if we have to have a sponsor on the inside. We have to have someone on the inside to even pay attention to our applications and grants. These are a major barrier. This particular ism goes on often, where we feel that by the time we even get to, let's say, a contract meeting, or we get to some type of contract conference, you can tell by the people in the room that they already know each other. They already have decided what they're going to do. And so we find that in the African-American community, we're never really on the inside with that. And later on, I'm sure we'll talk about this. Next slide. Nepotism. Well, if we're not friends of the people on the inside, you can probably guess we're probably not related to the people on the inside. Many times in contracts, nepotism is written in there as a prohibitive factor, but the reality is that if it's going to go on, it goes on, and these are barriers of the Black community, and so nepotism. Well, those of you out there, you understand. Let's move forward. And then, of course, racism. Racism is pervasive, and it is also not just blatant and overt. Many times it's just subconscious. Many times it's just a part of the system. And this systemic ism, we find that is a challenge because we find that even if we are allowed to apply for certain contracts, we're pigeonholed into only contracts that meet our particular neighborhood or our particular community, as if we can't speak to anyone else, or maybe we're going to allow you to speak to your own community. But yet the Black community is not a monolithic community. It has diversity in and of itself, and has capabilities and abilities to meet the needs of all of the citizens of the state, county, and city. So it is important to see this and to understand this. We have, though, however, been able to connect with our particular ACH, Elevate Health, wonderful partnership, because when they come in, they came in listening. They came in looking to help us to achieve what we were trying to achieve. And so it's important for us to see this, to know this, and it's really been a great partnership moving forward.
Thank you so much, Pastor Steele. And I know that we're already getting some questions, so I look forward to the cross conversation that we get to have. So next, Yusuf, if you would unmute yourself and share your perspectives and kind of give us, 7-ish minutes talking about the work that you're doing.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, my name is Yusuf Bashir. I'm actually refugee, immigrated from Kenya, some place called Kakuma, and I'm here in the United States for 16 years. When I came to the country, I wasn't actually speaking that much English. I don't speak that much English still, but there was a lot of difficulties I have been facing through immigrants, through applying food stamps, or answering, being in appointments on time and all that stuff because of cultural issues. And I knew what I go through. And in 2015, that's when I decided to start actually a non-profit organization to help the community. That wasn't a coincidence. I used to work as a social worker, as I said in my resume. I used to work as a social worker for 7 years back in Kenya, refugee camp, and I knew my community very well, and I knew I could do the job. But I never knew it's going to be this hard to help someone. In my country where I came from, people run away to help people because they don't have the time, they don't have the energy, they don't have the capacity to do it. But when I came here, I was thinking it would be too easy to help your community, but that wasn't the case. I tried to start a non-profit organization. Most of the places I go, I started with the non-profits who are already succeeded where I live. I live in Kent, and most of them wasn't that helpful. There was appointments after appointments. There was a little help. You don't know where to start. Language problems there. Resources were not available. Like, you don't know what you're doing. You don't know where to start. And I get a lot of rejection. I get a lot of disappointments. I get, I'm not talking about even like the higher level. I'm talking about the same non-profit organizations located in the same city, and I'm trying the same people living in the city. And what you get, most I get was like, you are over ambitious. I don't think you can do this job. We can't help you. Even I couldn't get a fiscal sponsorship to apply a grants. That was how hard was it to get into. I have been struggling for 3 years, from 2015 to 2018, to actually start the nonprofit. But on that case, I have been doing voluntarily. I've been actually renting my space, helping the community without money and all that stuff. For that 2015 to 2018, the maximum people who could help was 150 to 200 people individually in annual. That is 2018 when actually I happened to do some survey with the Healthier Here, which is SCHS, whatever they call, and it was great help. It was I can say it was the beginning of actually of refreshment for me, because I was, if you believe it or not, on that December, I was doing the survey. I decided to close down the nonprofit because there's no funding, there is no resources, there is no lead and everything. So I've been paying my own money for those 3 years, and I decided to close it down that very December. I met with the Healthier Here, and from that time, it was all they needed. They knew what they wanted. The first thing, they actually like started to help me build my capacity. Like the first grant I get, they were asking, can you do it? If you can't do it, you need to get more employees. You need to just get in larger offices. So it is starting like, where you would dream when you want to open nonprofit. You get the lead, which they guide you to what they want. They also know that, like, it's not coincidence that they wanted to work with me, because I had already 300 people actually I was working with, and they see that when I do the survey. So nothing was coincident. It was they wanted to work with the community, and I wanted to work for the community. So that actually where put us into same boat. And from that time, what I can't forget was the trust, and then also the relationship. It is like, you want to ask a question, and the question is already there. But I had times when I used to apply the grants. Most of the time, I get same result, which is like, we don't understand what you wrote. Um, Only people who actually write different language, I mean, language which is second to their language, to write a grant, you will know what I'm talking about. You can't write, I can write English, but necessarily doesn't, when you read, sometimes it doesn't make the sense you want it to make. So you can, and I always put under saying like, you can call me if you have any clarification, but none of them take a time. As my friend Buster said before, they don't have that time. They know your application shouldn't supposed to be even there. Sometimes I would see where you apply a grant and the deadline already came, but no answer. You don't even get like, we rejected you. So you have to actually work to find out your rejection. You just call it and email it and saying like, am I rejected? So they will tell you, yeah, sorry, we rejected you. So what I'm trying to say is like, the racism is not about something, it's happening to one person. It happens in the schools. It happens in as an organization where I'm working right now. It happens anywhere you go. Like you will have a comment sometimes where when I go, I remember one time where I go, people will tell you, go back to your country. I think a lot of people, they don't realize that we can all happy, and you cannot happy when your neighbor is not happy. This thing is actually depend on all of us. And basically my realization is, to get into being a non-profit organization, if it takes that much, imagine if you want to do bigger than that, if you want to change a revolution, if you want to work for people of color. This is not happening to me. And Healthier Here, it's not coincidence that they worked with me. When I looked at the other organizations they funded, it is all either bigger ones, middle ones, and low ones. They wouldn't look at your capacity. They only look if you can do the job. And that's why they are very successful, and they are actually doing the best they can. I wish this continues. I heard that they were saying this is going to go on another year or something, but they're the only organization who could be just digging into the community. And I remember we did a survey in 2018, as I mentioned it, and that survey comes back to the community. You can't believe it, how happy my community was. I don't care. I don't know about the other community. I'm sorry to say that, but my community was happy to validate their idea, to just they get someone who could be validating what they say and who could be thinking they are actually part of the game changing. And a lot of people were believed that that was the game changing. So I actually support what they do. I'm in a coalition right now with a lot of equity coalition. I'm an African Leaders Coalition. Now I'm actually established person, but I'm actually worried what is going to happen the new organization is merged in. My time is over. For this racism and whatever is going on, you can always talk in an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. But what needed to be talking is like, how can you be happy when your neighbor is not happy? Thank you.
Powerful words. Thank you so much. And just know that you will have more minutes because we're going to come back and have some questions for all of the panelists. So we're going to shift to Hadley from Better Health Together. And you're going to talk some about what your ACH has been doing internally as well as with community.
Yeah, thank you, Liz, and fellow panelists. I am Hadley. I have been Director of Equity and Engagement at BHT. I'm just approaching my 5th year here. Better Health Together serves 6 counties in the northeastern Washington area, Spokane, and then 5 rural counties around it. And we started not actually as the Accountable Community of Health, but as the Navigator Network, really to take on the role of training folks to help in, sign up for health insurance on the Washington Benefit Exchange. And in that role, we had a goal of signing up 10,000 people in the first 2 years, and instead we signed up 100,000. And what that really showed was the incredibly untapped and like urgent need throughout Eastern Washington and the whole entire state around gaining access to healthcare. However, getting all those insurance cards mailed out didn't necessarily translate into people actually getting the care that they needed. And I think some of the examples that Pastor Steele and Yusuf just shared are some of the things that speak to the real issue that we have around people getting access to improving their health. The biggest challenges that we're facing aren't really logistical, but cultural. And I think that's where our Accountable Community of Health has a really big opportunity to influence change. It's not really that the problem is there isn't enough money to solve these problems, or that there's not enough choices for people to make to access their needs. It's actually about the choices, how choices and money are being prioritized and for whom. So it is a cultural issue, not really about the logistics themselves. And in that, BHT started, I think we could have continued on our ACH role, really not talking about health equity very much. However, with the changing climate and also the simple fact that the Healthcare Authority put a question in some of our surveys saying we needed to start looking at how we were applying a health equity lens, we started having conversations with our community. And me personally, I went out and talked to some folks and said, hey, some of you are all leaders in your institutions. I need your help starting to apply an equity lens so I can report back to the Healthcare Authority what you all are doing. That didn't go over so well, especially in a region that right now is around 90% white overall. What we found was an incredible defensiveness to the idea and the language around health equity. And what really was a turning point, I have to share this story, was a meeting where I took my sweet service animal, Smokey, who's sleeping in the back, you may have seen him. And a gentleman, when I asked about health equity, stood up and started yelling and said, I don't know why you keep wanting me to talk about health equity. We don't have any Black people in our county. Not only is that factually incorrect, that is a comment that was based in racism. And my dog woke up from his nap and started barking and growling at the man because he was so agitated, which got a good laugh and got everyone to kind of calm down. But it led to a 45-minute conversation trying to center around what health equity really meant. The whole time I was having that conversation, I had that feeling of water rising above my head and feeling like I was incredibly out of my depth. So I went back home feeling a little rattled. And the next day I was surprised to receive an email from that gentleman, which said, you know what? The fact that your dog growled at me kind of signaled that maybe I wasn't behaving very professionally. And I'm wondering why the language around health equity makes me feel this way. There's something that makes me really defensive. Can I have a cup of coffee with you and start to talk about this? We talked for 3 hours and I walked away with 2 really important lessons. The first is that there's incredible power in dialogue, and that's really where the magic of some of this shift happens. And 2, that it was dangerous for me to go up and start talking about this, especially as a leader in community, without having done the personal work myself, to be able to stand there and know where my values really stood when it comes to conversations around equity and justice, and defend it without that, in a place of security, not necessarily comfort, because it's so uncomfortable when we face those tough conversations. this was a personal lesson that I was able to take back to BHT with a big shout out to my wonderful boss, Allison Polson, our executive director, our really open-minded team and board, who was able to start saying, okay, how can we do this as a team? We made a commitment to an all staff work group where we just prioritized having those conversations together for a full year. We told our staff, you probably didn't know when you signed up that being a health equity champion was going to be an essential job function, but now it is. And we're going to work for a whole year to give all the resources and tools and awareness to be able to claim that. But if you're not, that's going to be an expectation moving forward. And what that led to was an incredible evolution of a language and a sense of an ability to defend health equity amongst our team, almost that sense of belonging around our values on equity. And it started with really a simple definition that, health equity is when everybody has their best chance to be their full health potential. But then that didn't feel enough because we were asking who's responsible for that. So our language evolved. Health equity happens when institutions, agencies like all of you are working within, make that commitment to supporting each person to achieve their full health potential, regardless of who they are, where they come from, or what the environment is. And as we started asking the question, okay, well, that's great, but what's the barrier? Why haven't we got there? We realized it's the same as public health thinking. If you're looking at health equity, if you're looking at the injustices and inequities we see in healthcare, we're looking at a symptom of something bigger. So if we're looking at racism, if we're looking at inequities that exist by race, what's the cause of that? Race is the symptom. The cause is really a culture that has prioritized, that has built a system of power around race, that has defined power and choices by race, and has allowed sort of a white culture to dominate these systems of power. And through that, we started work on identifying and naming, okay, where has white dominant culture, where has really a history of white supremacy culture in our nation influenced our work, influenced the decisions that we're making? And I think a perfect example is in some of this philanthropy and giving and grant making that Yusuf talked about. Recently, as a response to COVID-19 and the emerging crisis and needs in our community, and also as a response to the outcry at the police killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and many, many more, and the protests that erupted around the nation, we decided to commit some of our community resiliency fund to a grant directed to addressing anti-racism. And when we did that, we looked through the lens of everything that we had learned in our year-long personal journey of talking and challenging each other and being challenged by others. And we said, you know what we could do to make a real change? We could commit $1 million and prioritize that $1 million to be accessed by organizations that are led by Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And we thought maybe we get like a dozen applications, because I said our region's 90% white, but we got 34 applications. And 20 of those applications were from organizations that we had never heard of before and not worked with before. And we didn't require fiscal sponsorships. And we offered opportunities for translation. We offered opportunities for coaching and support that wouldn't limit any of the, your access to the grant. And what we got was, again, same as we found with the Navigator Network, there was so much more untapped need than we thought. When we really applied this intentional lens, we looked at everything that we learned and we applied it to our work. That act of knowing better forced us into doing better. And the response, I think, really showed the magic of engaging deeply and trying to build this culture of belonging, really. So I'm grateful both to my team for helping engage in that and the overall response, and to my fellow co-panelists for sort of setting me up for being able to talk about that. So really excited for your questions all and grateful to be here learning with all of you on these next few days.
Great, thanks so much, Hadley. So I have some questions, but I'm going to go to the questions that have been popping up in the Q&A box first. And I think just there was an acknowledgement from multiple of you that commented about how hard it is to kind of apply and get into the systems because of lots of barriers. But there's a question about language access, and both thinking from the perspective of the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on communities of color, but including people for whom English is not their primary language, sometimes not their first or their second language. And if the panelists could address like how you are ensuring that people with limited English proficiency are accessing services. and how you engage in that way. So Yusuf, would you mind if I start with you and then I'll go to Pastor Steele and back to Hadley?
Not really. I'm excited to answer that question. Whatever the person actually boasted, that's the truth. What happened is when the COVID-19 started, there was a lot of overwhelming information. You don't know what you're reading, you don't know what you're seeing in the news, and English is not your first language. And a lot of resources were coming through radios, TVs, and so on. So one thing actually we were doing was translating the materials to the language we speak. But there is a problem also in the language. There was translations which is Somali. I'm from Somali, but basically I'm Somali Bantu, which is small community minority in Somali. So we don't speak same language. I mean, we speak same language, but the dialect is different. So we speak Mai. And also we have another language called Masagua. So we speak two different language from Somali. And when you overall you translate to Somali, that means I'm not getting still the information. It's still language access problem. So that is where I came to Bryce into to Healthier Here. They allow us to translate to my and give to our community. They give us the resources to do that. And from the beginning of the COVID-19 up to today, we are doing. But language access is exist. It's not about the overall also in a language, but it's also the dialogue differences. Each country, even Kiswahili, like a lot of people believe if you are from Africa, you know Kiswahili, but also the Kiswahili in Kenya and the Kiswahili in Tanzania are different. So it's a lot of dialogue different in within the language, which we need to address. In overall, a lot of people, maybe I don't know if they were translating from Google or I don't know. In Somali language, I can't read it. Like I get from DSHS letters, people bringing me. I'm graduate from high school actually in Somali, and I can't read it because the Somali is not the Somali I learn it. It is totally. It sounds different. Maybe it's a tribal Somali. Maybe few people wrote it, and from their tribe or from where they live or their location. That is might be the problem we are facing for the language access. So for me to address the language access, it takes to do an effort to all of us where you want to actually go back to the community and ask them which language do you speak. Like you go to the hospital and people will ask you, which country are you from? I had that actually incident happen to my community. Which country are you from? Somali. Boom, Somali translator is there. Now you are in a labor, you are in a band, and you have to answer questions which the language you don't even understand. So those are the things happening not once and not twice, not it happens over and over. So what we need to do is the providers have to be asking the questions, which language do you speak? It's not about which country do you come from. So, and then they have to try to find that kind of translation. I try to recruit some of my community. The also problem we are facing is we don't teach our languages to our children. Not necessarily. We teach them at home, but when it comes to reading and writing, that's also another difficulty we're facing, especially people coming from another countries. My kid, like let us say some kids, you can't talk to them. They understand the language, but they can't talk back. They can also write. They can also read. So those are the also resources we need to get to actually keep in touch our children to learn their own language so that they can translate to the elderly people, because most of the time what happens is that the kids catch up into English in the very second they come to the country. They know all about English. They can read, write, and everything. To translate that English to their language, that's the problem. So the family, they have 2, 5, 6 people graduated from high school and still can't translate, can't say something to their mom. They can't give information to their mom or dad. So those are the problems also we're facing in a language problem. So I would like to give the chance. I can say a lot of other things about language, but I would like to give the chance to my fellow panel just to say what they want to say. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Yusuf. Pastor Steele, just any thoughts you have around kind of language proficiency, access to services, how those are barriers?
No, as it relates to the African American community, when you talk about language, it's more about presentation. It's also about who's in the ad, who's on the flyer. It's also about the language that's used. It's also about when we start to talk in meeting environments and in conferences, who's actually disseminating the information. I don't want to sound self-serving, but a lot of times in the African American community, the pastors of the churches, they're the doctor, the lawyer, the Indian chief. So they will find themselves in a position where they have to translate information that's being disseminated in a way that lends credence to it. So when we start talking about language, even in America with English culture, we call it, sometimes we even call it ebonics. Some of that has to be a part of the understanding of reaching the masses. And but then again, it has to be really decided if that's what they want to do. If you really are motivated to reach a particular demographic, then you'll go that extra step. But if you're just checking boxes and making sure you satisfy the syllabus so that you receive your funding, then you'll probably pass over that.
Thank you. Hadley, anything you'd want to add? Because part of what I'm hearing is, not only the translation, but the level of information and how complex it is, and is it coming from a trusted voice? But anything that you want to add in there?
Absolutely. I chatted a couple things, I typed some answers to your question just really quick. But I think, outside of some of our initial commitments, I'll admit it's super hard, especially to just be able to have a pool of folks that you can tap to make sure you have someone to translate. One of the things that we've really focused on is, especially in our Navigator network, which is where we have the most direct service, is, when open enrollment happens and we're, getting a ton of people signed up for health insurance, where can we commit to hiring folks that have language skills? And really prioritizing that. So throughout our open enrollment seasons, we've hired part-time navigators who speak Spanish, Russian, and Marshallese. There's a large Kofa Islander population in Spokane. And those folks weren't necessarily people who were navigators before, but we knew we could train that skill. And what was more important was prioritizing that access. So I think that goes back to some of the commitments internally for the organization to say, okay, we're going to prioritize this and also make a culture within our organization that's going to help folks, belong within this. And I think that goes back to what Pastor Steele was saying as well, where when we're looking at our communications, when we're looking at what were we sending out that represents everything that we send out, whether it's a Facebook post or an RFP or whatever, it represents the organization, putting that through a lens of, okay, well, who is going to benefit from it being written this way, from it being presented this way, and who might it be a barrier for, and what can we tear down? And part of it has been just about being really open to saying, hey, if we're doing an RFP and writing it doesn't work, give us a call at this number and we'll figure it as something else out. Or, hey, if you don't have a computer, if what's the barrier, just give us a call, we'll figure it out. And that's not something that's often trusted right away. So it takes time to be showing up in communities, to be going out into spaces, into meetings, gatherings, coalitions, and saying, hey, this is why we want to be a part of this. This is where we can support, to build that trust, because it just doesn't happen through a flyer or sort of that passive information. You have to build that trust and build trusted relationships with local community leaders who can disseminate that information as well.
Thanks, Hadley. So I'm going to start with you on this next question. So thinking about intersectionality, how we think about racism, and as Pastor Steele started to lay out in his slides, all of the other isms that are in place, but thinking about working with communities of color, immigrant communities, LGBT community, how do we get to veterans and homelessness, and where all those things kind of interplay with each other? Just any strategies that you've thought about at BHT?
I love that question. It's a question that we get a lot. And I think sometimes it feels overwhelming to see all of the different isms and all of the spaces where people are experiencing privilege or experiencing othering. and asking sort of, oh my gosh, how can I sort of dive into this? And one of the things that I've really leaned into is recognizing that one, like I have never seen, and especially my ancestors have, as a white person, have not created a culture where we are embracing anti-racism, or a culture or really a world that has lived in this state of equity and justice that we're talking about. So I give myself a little bit of permission to know that I will make some missteps and have to explore along the way. It will be sort of messy. And anywhere that I choose to dive in will start to engage tools that help tear down oppression. So one of the questions that we get a lot is, BHT is really proud to say Black Lives Matter. Like that is a movement and a mission that we support. And a question that I get sometimes is, well, don't you worry that saying Black Lives Matter might mean that you're invalidating, like what about Indigenous lives? What about refugee lives? What about, traumatized lives? What about foster lives? Like what about all of these other spaces where oppression is happening? And the answer is yes. Supporting Black Lives Matter doesn't invalidate or doesn't remove from any of those other missions. And because of intersectionality, we know that the work to support Black lives will also support LGBTQ Black lives, will also support Indigenous and Black lives, will also support, it starts to help rise up in other spaces. And the tools that we learn to engage in anti-oppression work apply in other lenses. I will say, the same tools don't tear down the same walls. So it's not like we can say that what works in one community will work in all communities, but the work that we do as organizations and in our personal life to start to dismantle some of the ways that choices have been prioritized and move towards that state of justice, they all work in the same direction. I hope that makes sense. I hope that resonates with folks.
Great. Pastor Steele, as a faith community that is so incredibly established with your history in Tacoma, any thoughts that you have about those intersectionality issues and the populations that you and your church serve?
Well, I think our issue more so comes from the other side. Because of the intersections, many times our message gets watered down. Our message gets muddled. We find in our own discussions internally, we find ourselves with a level of frustration of what we call coattail riders, because the African-American community's history in America is one that is unique unto the African-American experience. And so when we start to talk about even access to healthcare, we're talking about issues that African-Americans in particular have experienced. And because of a lack of or suppression of our history and our plight, many times that intersection not only gets muddled and watered down, but it becomes confusing, and it comes in some cases even combative, because now we are then competing against each other. One thing you will find, Brother Youssef had enlightened me that when he came to America, he thought that he was just going to be considered a person from his country. There are others from other countries of Kenya and also from Nigeria, and even those from Nigeria in particular. Let's say for those that are in Nigeria, they have a section of Igbo and they got Yoruba, and so then so they're thinking they're going to be just identified as their tribe. And what they find when they come to America, that intersection it then gets melted, and they really get put into a space where they start to feel all of what we have already felt for 400 years. And then they begin to experience and realize that the intersectionality that's there, it's important for people to see that when we talk about Black Lives Matter, it's probably more so a problem of semantics, because it really should say Black Lives Matter, too. And because we don't have an understanding of what the phrase is, to say that if Black lives don't matter in America, or in a, let's say, in a process of application or contracting or systemic racism, then no lives can really matter. And it is important for this to be understood. And I think in that intersection, I think not only is it a teachable moment, I really do enjoy the fact that we are now in a season of not just COVID-19, but of protest and pandemic and politics and all of the P's, if you would. It's important that we can now have this type of conversation. We're not just talking about contracting and healthcare. We're talking about the access of it or the denial of it from a racial standpoint. And this is a great discussion, not only to be had today, but even beyond, so that we actually do something about it, and we actually move forward and take this season to see what have we done right and what have we done wrong, and actually address it in the intersection, with not in our own little groups and so forth, because um, um, uh, before we can get to the LGBT community, before we can get to other communities, African Americans have to first deal with the issue that when we wake up in the morning, that is our plight from the time we wake up to the time that we go to bed. And that's important for us to see this. And if you talk about healthcare, I mean, you can just look at all the disparities. When they put it out there, African Americans continue as a categorically to underperform against all just about every other ethnic group, because it is important and imperative that we deliver what needs to be delivered to the people that it needs to be delivered to.
Thank you so much. Yusuf?
Thank you for giving me another chance to talk about this question. It's an important question, and I could just relate into my actually life, where um, when you come to United States, you feel happy, you feel blessed, you feel like you done just life, that's it. You don't actually have to think about racism again. You don't have to think about someone doesn't like you, talking about racism, color, and all that stuff. I'm actually like disappointed, to tell you the truth, man. Like many other immigrant people come here, I'm disappointed because we are too far away. In my country, we don't have a racism. We I mean, this is my country now, and I consider this is my country, and I live here for 16 years. I'm a proud citizen. But the thing is, you surprised where we are, according to like when you come into the country, what are you thinking? And when you came, what do you see? It's totally different. It's really disappointing. The other thing is, um, this intersection thing, it's not gonna take one person to address. It takes the whole community to address. And how? That's the question. It is just like we always say, and we teach our kids when they were young: treat people the way you would like to be treated. But none of us does. We talk about it, but nothing is actually happening. Like from our president all the way down to the people you meet everyday life, they tell you we want to stop racism. So my thinking is like this conversation need to be talked. Like now, the panel we have right now, I think it should have been talked only racism or how we can just get out of it and put everyone his opinion. That's what I think. The conversation, if it's not talked about it, it will never get a solution. It shouldn't be pleasant conversation. It shouldn't be comfortable, but we need to go out of the zone. Every one of us is pretending. When I tell you the truth, we are pretending we are actually in a comfort zone where we are okay with what we get. None of us is okay. And we need to address that as a team, as a community, as a nation, to say that why are we, like, let us say in the debates our presidents have, When they talk about immigrants, they talk about foreign policy, but they don't talk about racism happening in the country, what they want to do about it. I don't know if people are seeing that or if I'm only seeing. So I don't know. We need to start these things to be talking together as a group. And also, what my brother says is just the truth. We came here and we are already categorized into some place where you don't want to be. That's why you left your country. That's why you had that problem in your country. Now you come to this country, you want to you want to start fresh. You don't want someone pushing you into corner again and makes you think you are not belonging here. Um, I'm a big fan of John Bowell. I even attended to his meetings in California, and I follow him. And whatever he's talking about belonging, if you want to learn what's belonging means, you need to watch that video. You need to listen. Not only me, everyone in the United States needs to listen to that video so that you will know what does belonging actually mean. You can't just touch my shoulder and tell me you are here, and then the next thing you tell me, you put me into my video off and you tell me you are not here. So either we are in or we are out. I have been getting a comments where people say go back to your country because of my accent. Where would I go back? I left my country 16 years back. I left my other countries, what is that, 30 years back. I don't even know where they are. I don't even know where they're located anymore. I don't even know my house anymore. This is my house. This is my country. This is where I belong. Until you guys accept that, and then it's not going to work. We have to accept that we belong here. We are here to support you. We are here to live here. We are not here to just to distract. So what I'm saying is this whole thing needed to be addressed as a team, as a community, as a country, and then we will get out of this mess. Thank you.
So Yusuf, I'm gonna give you a chance to make like one more comment as I go through this last question. If you were thinking about state agencies and the ACHs and others, like, is there something that comes to mind, like one thing that you would want all of those organizations to do that would actually address some of these barriers that you're talking about in the system?
I think I would say two things rather than one, and I'm sorry because those two things I have to say. One thing, um, they need actually not to see the organizations which is already established themselves. They have to see the grassrooted community organizations which is there, which are capable of doing more than the so-called big agencies. I can guarantee you, I am able to serve. I used to serve 150 to 200 people from 2015 to 2018. Only when I started getting grants from Healthier here. In 2019, I served 1,863 people. And in 2020, which is not ended yet, I'm actually up to 2,721 people. So that is how big you can grow. It's not necessarily if you are small, you will never grow. So that's one thing I would like to say. You need to look at what the small rooted organizations can do for you, because we are on the field. We're meeting with the people in a daily basis. The second thing I would wanted to add, it's like the funding. When you give a funding which is at least less restricted. If you can be, it can be unrestricted, because that is the way most problem I face. You have the money and someone is in trouble. He needs might be little head, might be 100 or 200, dollars could change, his perspective of what he wanted to do. I had the families when I called them for youth development program, their child is actually dropping out in the school. So I wanted to address that. And then when they sit in there, they keep looking at the papers they holding and they say, I'm worried about my electricity. Can you pay this for me? So they can't talk even until you pay that. So unrestricted funds will allow you to do certain things like that. But we are all restricted money, and where you can do certain things and you want to help the community, but you can't help at your capacity. So that's the two things I would like to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Yusuf. Pastor Steele.
Repeat the question again. I'm sorry.
If there were one or two things that you would say all of the ACHs, the partners that we have, state agencies need to do in order to address these barriers and racism in the system?
Well, I think to dovetail off of what Yusuf said, certainly it is also the help of making sure that we relax, I should say, some of the other mandatory elements of it, of these contracts. Also, we have to make sure that we understand also when you create those types of mandates on contracts, that we are not dealing with machines, we're dealing with people. And when you're dealing with people, you have to understand that life is ever changing, it evolves, and it is not one size fits all. Also, what I haven't, we just got started with our ACH, and already after 131 years, it's finally a great experience. Understand that. Understand that it is a situation where I would share with other ACH to make sure that you go there and listen to what the need is. Don't just put it in. We find that what the real scenario has been is that, well, you've applied for funding. And so you have funding coming, and it has its own stipulations on it. So then now you're trying to then fit other things into a box, and so you can get that checked, so that way you have met your checklist. What I would say is that you too need to make sure that you're having the same conversation that we're having with our ACH. You need to have your conversation with your funding source as well, so that everyone in the chain understands that we are still dealing with people, and then also to understand that if you look at historical data, there is a reason why the African American community is consistently underserved. That's because we consistently do the same thing over and over again and try to expect different results. It is important for us, I mean, whether, and this is not just for healthcare, this is for voting, this is for the census, this is for all of those contracts out there that continuously go to agencies that do not speak to certain demographics. And quite frankly, it's just easy for you to use or to deal with those that you've dealt with in the past because you know them, cronyism, you're related to them, nepotism, and then we don't really want to deal with too many folks, and some would even say racism. So this is important for us to see this, to understand this, because we have to have real discussions, and ACHs out there have real discussions and be open to doing something out of the box. It's okay. We're not going to have a different result if we don't do anything different.
Thank you so much. Hadley, any last words?
Yeah, I think just really quick, a couple slogans come to mind that BHT seems to repeat a lot. One, there's no growth in the comfort zone. And just recognizing that, you know, part of this is a tough journey, and we are unwinding things that have been in place over generations. They're not only deeply embedded in our systems, they're deeply embedded within our bodies and our DNA, and it's going to take a lot of uncomfortable moments to move through them. Progress, not perfection. So that's just encouragement to keep going. Mistakes will be made, but that's where we learn also. And third, you know, I really hear this in what Pastor Steele was saying, show up. Show up. I think the beauty of the ACHs is that we were designed based on the idea that local communities know what's best, know what works for them. So where are you showing up? Is your organization, you know, a member of the NAACP? Do you have staff that are dedicated to show up to community-based coalitions, to public meetings, town halls, you know, so that your organization becomes a face that is trusted and really seen within that community? Because if you're not doing that show up work, when you ask, people aren't going to take you seriously, and you're not going to be the priority. So show people that you're going to show up for them. That would be my 3 slogans of wisdom from Better Health Together.
That's awesome. I mean, so I'm going to give you our 2 slogans. but one is, my kids have always asked me, so like, Mom, who did you unsettle today? And that if we are not unsettling people, we're probably not being transformative. And then our team, thanks to some earlier work that we did in 2017, we've kind of adopted this notion of fail forward. We are going to fail, but let's do it in a way that actually moves us forward. I'm going to close this panel. I would love to continue this for like more hours. But I wanted to end with, we had somebody put in the Q&A box, I've never heard a panel like this sponsored by a state agency. I don't have words yet, but this experience is changing me. I wish I could give these brave panelists a standing ovation. Please bring more conversations like this to the work of health transformation. So, on behalf of, it looks like about 450 people, I just want to thank the three of you so much for agreeing to be on this panel. I know we tried to shorten and truncate some things that really are the beginning of some deep conversation, but hope that we continue to have opportunities like this with you and with others as we continue this work across the state of Washington. So thank you so very much. I think I'm turning this back to Bonnie, maybe. Who's going to take us into the break? Oh, we have a slideshow that's coming up. And so we're going to be back at 11 o'clock for a panel on COVID-19 and how it's hitting some populations harder than other populations. So you get about a 10-minute break. And if you're staying, you can watch the slideshow. And otherwise, we will see you all back at 11 o'clock. Thank you.